Joining us now, President Emeritus of the Council on Foreign Relations and Senior Counselor at Centerview Partners, Richard Haass. Richard, it's really good to have you. You've been very clear that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and President Biden are not on the same page. Do you see what President Biden is trying to do right now as enough on this issue of Israel and Gaza, on the war in Gaza, the ceasefire, the hostages, and whatever happens the day after?
I think the president is going in the right direction. But to answer your question, I've got questions of two things. One is what you were just talking about. It's not obvious to me why he would be making predictions about this deal. It gives them too much leverage to Israel and to Hamas to try to use his leaning forward as pressure on him. Plus, I think it's quite possible that Hamas may not want a deal, daring the Israelis to use force against Palestinians during Ramadan. They would then hope that would trigger widespread support for Hamas throughout the Arab and Muslim world. So let me just park that there. More broadly, no, I think there's much more the administration could be doing. I've talked about the president speaking directly to the Israeli people, going over the head of this government. I like the symbolism of his going to the Israeli parliament. We could be pushing for our own resolutions in the UN Security Council. We could be putting conditions on the use of armaments we provide. We could be putting certain economic sanctions on goods the Israelis want to export that are made in settlements and so forth. So I think there's lots of things we could be doing beyond what it is now. And what's also clear to me, I'd be surprised if you disagreed, we are trying to persuade this Israeli government to adopt a different strategy. So far, there's precious little evidence that they are open to being persuaded. So I think we have to stake out a much more independent policy.
So you've argued that that's partially going to the Israeli public directly and doing what Benjamin Netanyahu has done here, which is go to Congress and deliver a speech around the president's invitation, doing it at the invitation of Congress. Do you think President Biden, A, would be invited to the Knesset? And if he were, why would he not try to go do that?
Look, I would think that, President Biden, if he wants to speak to Israelis directly, can do it. He's far more popular in Israel than the prime minister. I like the symbolism of speaking from the Knesset, but if that didn't work, he's got any number of other sites he could speak from in Israel. There's universities, there's private arrangements, or he could do it from here. And quite honestly, more important than where he speaks from is what he's prepared to say. And he doesn't need the permission or the invitation from the Israeli government to say things that need saying. He doesn't need to push for a two-state solution. He shouldn't do that tomorrow. The pieces aren't in place, but he can talk about the need for Israel to show great restraint. He can talk about the need to start a political process and so forth. There's lots of things he can put on the table, and he can make it clear that he's not doing this to Israel. He's doing this for Israel. If Israel wants to be a secure, prosperous, democratic Jewish state, it has to adopt a different policy towards the Palestinians, not as a favor to them, but as a favor to itself.
There's a lot of talk in Michigan about this protest vote, the voting uncommitted, to send a message to President Biden about where Arab Americans stand on his policy and his support of Israel and its bombardment of Gaza. If Donald Trump were to win, how much worse could it get?
Well, look, the previous Trump administration put the Palestinian issue off to the side. The entire logic of the Abraham Accords was to normalize relations between Arab governments in Israel, ignore the Palestinians. That's not going to work anymore. Even the Saudis and others who were prepared to come forward then are not prepared anymore without something significant for the Palestinians. But look, one of the rules of the Middle East, one of the lessons of Middle East history is things can always get worse. And that could mean much more violence in the occupied territories in the West Bank. It could be an open-ended, costly, terrible occupation of Israel in Gaza. It could be the war spreading to the north between Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon. So again, as bad as things are, we should never ignore the possibility that they not only could they get worse, they are likely to get worse unless there's a major change in diplomacy here.
I'm running up against a wall, but do you foresee the Biden administration, if they get extended for 4 years, recognizing a Palestinian state, going around Israel and just recognizing a Palestinian state?
I wouldn't do that. No, I think what they should do is articulate the need for one and the conditions that would have to be met by the Palestinians before the United States could support one.
Richard Haass, really good to have you. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, Katie.